All right, let's dive into one of the biggest shakeups in accounting we've seen in a very long time, the right of use asset. Now, I know what you're thinking, another accounting rule, but stick with me. This is so much more than a new line item. It's a total shift in how we look at what a company is truly on the hook for. So get this. For decades, a company, think a major airline or a massive retailer, could be using billions of dollars worth of planes, stores, and warehouses. But when you looked at their balance sheet, none of those massive financial promises showed up as debt. It sounds crazy, right? But this was the reality, and it created this huge blind spot for anyone trying to understand a company's real risk. And this wasn't some sneaky back alley loophole. Nope, this was the officially accepted rule for something called operating leases. All those payments, all those commitments were real, but they were tucked away deep in the footnotes of financial reports. It made it almost impossible to get a true picture of a company's financial health. This whole situation was famously known as the hidden debt problem, and it was a massive headache for the people who write the accounting rules, the FASB and the IASB. They knew they had to fix it. They needed a way to drag all those hidden promises out of the footnotes and put them right on the balance sheet for everyone to see. And their solution was actually pretty elegant. It's called the right of use asset, or ROU asset. The idea is simple. If you sign a contract that gives you the right to use, say, a building for 10 years, that right itself is a valuable asset. And, this is the crucial part, it comes with a matching liability, which is your promise to make all those lease payments. Now, this wasn't just about moving numbers around. This was a really big philosophical shift. Accounting started to care less about an old, simple question, do you own it, and started asking a much more important one, do you control it? See, the old school way was all about legal title. Do you have the deed to the building? Is the truck registered in your name? But the modern view, the one that gives us the ROU asset, says what really matters is the economic reality. If you're the one using the asset and you're the one getting the benefits from it, well, for all intents and purposes, you have an asset on your hands. It doesn't matter who legally owns it. So, how do accountants actually figure out the value of this right? Well, it's not just a number they pull out of thin air. There's a very logical, step-by-step process they follow to get to a number that truly reflects what that right is worth. You can almost think of it like building a house. First, you lay the foundation. That's your lease liability, which is just all your future lease payments discounted back to today's dollars. Then you add on any upfront costs to get the lease going, kind of like the framing and the walls. Think broker commissions. But hey, maybe the landlord gave you some cash to sign the lease, right? That's an incentive, so you subtract that out. And once you've done all that, what you're left with is the final number, your right of use asset. Okay, now here's where things get a little tricky. The whole world pretty much agreed that putting leases on the balance sheet was a good idea. But they couldn't agree on what to do after that. And this disagreement created a major split between the international rules, known as IFRS 16, and the US rules, called ASC 842. Let me break it down. Under the international standard, IFRS 16, every single lease is basically treated like you're buying the asset with a loan. This means your total expense is front-loaded. It's higher at the beginning and gets lower over time. But in the US, they decided to keep the old idea of an operating lease. And for those, they wanted the expense to look exactly like it used to. Just a simple, straight-line rent expense every single year. And to do that, well, they had to invent something a little weird. And that's where we get this idea of a plug. It's kind of funny, actually. You've got your interest expense, which naturally goes down over time, but you want the total expense to stay flat. So to make the math work, the other piece of the expense, the amortization of the ROU asset, has to do the opposite. It has to increase over time to perfectly balance out the declining interest. It's a calculated trick, a plug figure, all designed to create that smooth, straight-line expense. So this massive change happens. Trillions of dollars in commitments that were once hidden are now sitting on balance sheets around the world. What happened next? The impact was huge, and it completely changed the way we analyze a company's financial footing. Overnight, we saw what's called the gross-up effect. All of a sudden, both the assets and the liabilities on company balance sheets just ballooned. The company didn't actually buy anything new, and it didn't borrow any more money, but its balance sheet got a whole lot bigger, finally reflecting the true amount of resources it actually controlled. But this also created a major trap for investors who weren't paying attention. You see, the old rent expense used to come out before you calculated EBITDA. Now that expense is split into two parts, interest and amortization. And guess what? Both of those are ignored when calculating EBITDA. So poof, EBITDA magically looks higher, even though the company isn't generating a single extra dollar in cash. It's just a reclassification. And we're not talking about a tiny change here. One study of companies in Norway found that EBITDA went up by an average of 20% after this rule came into play. For retailers or airlines, it was sometimes closer to 50%. Analysts had to scramble to update their models so they wouldn't mistake this accounting quirk for a massive improvement in business. Of course, all of the key financial ratios went for a ride too. Debt to equity shot up because, well, you just added a ton of new debt-like liabilities. Return on assets, or ROA, went down because the asset base, the A in the formula, was suddenly much bigger. Even ratios that measure short-term health, like the current ratio, often looked worse. The key takeaway is that you have to know this was just the accounting changing, not the underlying business. So after all this disruption, all this complexity, you might be wondering, was it really worth it? And the answer is a clear and resounding yes, because what we have now is a much more honest number and a much more transparent financial world. Think about the real-world impact here. For credit rating agencies, the guesswork is over. They finally have hard, standardized data instead of having to estimate a company's lease debt. That old incentive to lease something just to keep the debt off your books? Gone. And now, companies have to make the classic lease versus buy decision based on actual economics, not just accounting tricks. And really, it all comes back to this one simple, powerful idea. The goal of financial reporting should be to show the economic reality of a business. And now, financial statements do a much better job of showing us all the resources a company controls and all the commitments it has made. We're getting a much more honest picture. So, what does this all mean for you? The right-of-use asset isn't just an entry for accountants to worry about, it's a brand new lens that you can use to understand a business. This information isn't hidden anymore. You have a clearer, more complete picture than ever before. So the real question is, how does seeing the whole story change your view of a company's true financial strength?